Well, just while everybody's getting logged in, I'm going to call the meeting to order and look to, well, first I'm going to read a statement. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternative formats and communication supports for council standing or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489 extension 2425. I'll look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest from committee members. Seeing none, we have two consent items. There is an added agenda. There's a couple things on added agenda under additional business, but we have two consent items. If anybody would like to vote on those separately, they're both information items, so we could certainly ask questions of staff or receive the reports together, but we could also do them separately if committee would like to do those. If anybody wants to do them separately, now's the time to let me know. If not, then we'll make a motion. I'll look for a mover. Oh, yes? Yeah, no problem. We can put them together. You can speak to both of them. So I'll need a mover for 2.1 and 2.2. Councillor Hillier, Councillor Kaibaga, the second. And when that gets up on the screen, I'll go to Councillor Van Meerbergen in the meantime.
Well, I thank staff very much for this report. This first came forward, I believe, 2 councils ago. And I was not supportive of this then, and I continue not to be. The primary hiring criterion in this city should be on merit. We should not be hiring based on skin coloration and or range of sexual orientation or variation of ideologies. The merit principle needs to be the primary hiring method at the City of London. And so I'm prepared to move a motion to amend this motion with an "it being noted" clause at the end of this report be received for information purposes. It being noted that the primary hiring criterion be based on merit at the Corporation of the City of London. So that would be my amendment to this motion, an "it being noted" clause. Has the clerk got that?
Okay. So you want to add an "it being noted" to both of these items because we're basically passing both.
Yeah,
reports?
that's fine.
Okay. Okay. I'll need to know if the committee is supportive of that because, you know, we could certainly add that as a motion or we can do it by consensus as a committee. If there's not consensus as a committee, then we're going to have a mover, a seconder, and a debate. So does anybody object to what Councillor Van Meerbergen is suggesting to add a "it being noted" clause? No, if you don't want that, what I'm suggesting is at committee we can do it in one of two ways. We can just work by consensus. If someone makes a suggestion, no one objects to it, then we'll just add it to the motion. We'll vote on the whole motion. If someone doesn't want that added to the motion, then they should say they don't. And then what I'll do is I'll have a mover and a second, an actual formal move and second process to go through. So if you don't want that added, then, so you object? Okay, so we're going to look for a mover and a seconder for that because the committee doesn't have consensus on that. So is everybody clear on what Councillor Van Meerbergen is asking? He wants to add it, be it noted with the language he used.
It being noted that the primary hiring criterion be based on merit at the Corporation of the City of London.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? Councillor Hillier, second that. Discussion on adding this "it being noted" clause to the items. Mr. Coxhead has some context as well. If there's no objections, I'm going to let him speak about the hiring process. Nope, there are no objections from committee. Go ahead, Mr. Coxhead.
Thank you, through the chair. The council, there's a council policy with respect to hiring of employees that's based on meritorious. The best candidate for the job gets the job, in essence. So we have that as a council policy. It's approved by council in the last go around last year. That speaks to the meritorious. So this is just data about how we look relative to our community that we serve. The scenarios here and our activities are generally around ensuring people are aware and have an understanding of the job opportunities, that there's equal access and eliminating barriers for folks that might have not sought municipal work. But at the end of the day, they have to be able to do the job. So I leave you with that.
I have Mayor Holder and then Councillor Kaibaga.
Through you, Chair, to Mr. Coxhead, are you then suggesting that the suggestion moved by Mr. Van Bergen then becomes redundant or not necessary? I appreciate your opinion.
Mr. Coxhead.
In my opinion, it's not necessary because council policy already governs that area. This is a report about how we look as opposed to how we hire.
Councillor Hillier, you looked like you were trying to get my attention. You want to withdraw your second for this?
I can withdraw my second for this. If it's redundant, it doesn't make any sense to move forward with it.
Okay, Councillor Van Meerbergen, do you still want to proceed with this? Because I'll look for another seconder if you want to proceed, but if you want to withdraw.
I don't see any harm with restating this particular, as we've heard, policy. I see no harm in it at all. Just reminding the community and our corporation of what's paramount. So to go ahead with this, I'm prepared to stay with this. We can get a seconder.
Okay, is there a seconder for this? I don't see one, so so it will not be a motion that we'll consider. So we're back to just the motion to receive 2.1 and 2.2, and I would look for any committee members who want to comment on those items at this time. Okay, seeing none, we'll put that up. Oh, Councillor Van Holst, sorry. Welcome to the committee.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the data on page 4, where the staff presented the breakdown of the people that we hired. But I'm also interested in, I think it would be valuable to know the breakdown of the people who applied, because that might give us a better situation of where we're at in terms of reaching the various communities. If the number of people who apply matches the demographic of the city, then we'll know for sure that our plans to reach everybody are working pretty well.
Does our staff have any comment on that, on the applications and the availability of that data, or is it just based on hiring data?
It's just based on hiring data at this, and it's unlikely that we're able to capture that data during a process because we're not permitted to ask.
Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Helmer.
So I was saying these two reports, really good work done to our staff. You know, this has been over the last couple of years a really big undertaking. I think it's acknowledged in the report that the breadth of the activities that are happening on all different fronts. I think that it's really encouraging. You know, I think we're trying to get the absolute best people to come work at the City of London, and it's difficult to try and unpack and move beyond some of the things that were preventing us from doing that, right? And that is the purpose of the diversity and inclusion efforts, is to get the best people, right? And these are things that are not in conflict with each other. They're the same thing. And I think it's important to recognize that. I think the report lays out all the different things that we're doing. I think I don't want to read too much into any one of these time periods and how things are tracking, but it is good to see it over time, and the fact that we're tracking it at all, I think is really a good step forward. I've said this before at other updates on this process. On the equity and inclusion lens in particular, I'm glad to see where it's landed. You know, I think, I can't remember who it was, it might have been Councillor Ridley back in the last council. So can we look at Ottawa, you know, and take a look at what's already out there? I think we've done a good job of adding in London to what was already there and was great work. And I think we ended up with something that hopefully other organizations will use in their own efforts, because I think it's very well done overall. And I want to say thank you to the staff for that work.
Any other comments from committee? If not, I'm going to open this for voting. So this is the receiving both 2.1 and 2.2 reports.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-1.
Okay, next on the agenda is 4.1, which is consideration of appointments to the Environmental and Ecological Planning Advisory Committee. We require 6 members. There are 3 applicants. Committee members could certainly make a motion to approve those applicants, either all of them or some of them. So I would look to committee for some action on this particular item. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I'll move that we appoint all 3 candidates. Looks like an interesting mix of skills. I think they'll add to the committee.
Sure, seconder. Councillor Kaibaga. Any discussion? Seeing none, I will open that for a vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And next we have an appointment to the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Committee. This is confirmation of an appointment. This is an alternate voting member from the Thames Valley District School Board, and we have a candidate that fits that. So I'd look for a mover and seconder to support that candidate. Mayor Holder, Councillor Van Meerbergen. Any discussion? Okay, we'll open that one for a vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And we're on to the added agenda. There are 3 items on the added agenda, 2 from Councillor Van Holst, who is here today to speak to his items, 1 from myself. I'm going to deal with them one at a time in the order they are on the agenda. So the first is a request from Councillor Van Holst to task the government working group with a couple of items to investigate the merits of moving to a daytime schedule and the merits of having city council considered to become a full-time role. If the committee doesn't object, I'll let Councillor Van Holst just introduce his idea, and then I'll have to look to a committee members for a mover and a seconder on this. Someone who's not on the committee can't move it, but I think out of respect for the councillor who wrote the letter, let's hear what his case is, and then we can decide what action we want to take. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the 2, well, this is pretty clear. It's just a matter of having the committee move that these be sent on to the governance working group. The first one is talking about the daytime schedule. We spent a fair bit of time preparing one of those. Unfortunately, that issue wasn't worked out last term because of just delays. So it was months of delay just to get it onto the agenda, and then we wanted to have we were going to vote on it, but wanted to have public participation, so that was another 2 months delay, and no one showed up to the public participation meeting, and by that time it was a little late, and so we decided we better just left to this council to consider that. And of course the next one was the idea of should London consider its council to be full-time. Most of the other municipalities our size do that, so this would be a worthwhile conversation. I'll point out that this conversation never really happened last term. I recall very early when we were first looking at compensation, making a motion to say, let's talk about whether or not this should be full-time. I walked out into the councillor's office, the first councillor available, said, hey, would you second this motion that we'll have the discussion? And they said yes. And when I got here, they were at the door and they said, I chickened out. And so I leaned to somebody else and said, hey, would you second this motion? They said, no, just leave it to the group that's looking into compensation, because they may figure this out and we won't have to actually have this stand up and have the conversation ourselves. So And at that point, I thought, okay, well, we'll see what they come up with. And of course, that group never really discussed the full-time issue. They didn't come to that conclusion or discuss that in a really fulsome way. So I'm hoping to have that conversation as well. So those are the two. I leave it to your committee to decide if those are going to the group.
So I'll look to committee members. It's a request from a counselor. You've heard his case. You can certainly, we do need to deal with the item in some way. So if you're supportive of it, you could certainly move a motion to support the counselor. If you're not, you could move a motion to note and file this communication, but we do have to take an action as a committee on this. So I look to committee members on this item. Councillor Hillier.
Through the chair, would the council be willing to amend the motion to say this is discussed at a future date, but for the next term of council, not this term? Many people that were elected this term were elected under these conditions, and it couldn't be modified during this term.
So what I will describe is I can go to Councillor Van Holst to comment on that, but there's no motion on the floor as we sit. So a member of this committee can make whatever motion they feel is appropriate based on the communication. So you could certainly move a motion. We would look for a seconder at that point, and then we would proceed with debate on that. At this point, what we have is a communication from the councillor on specific items, but there's not a specific motion before us because only committee members can move and make motions. So I could ask the councillor to comment, and then you would have to be willing to move a motion if you'd like to go that way. Councillor Van Holst, do you want to comment on the councillor's question?
Happy to comment. I would at council move these motions as they are. It's going to be a discussion. If that's the way the discussion goes at the government's working group, that's fine, right? But we as a council could make any decisions we like regarding these things.
Councillor Hillier? No? Anybody else? I need a motion to deal with this. Councillor Van Meerbergen.
I'll move to note and file.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Hillier, debate and discussion on noting and filing Councillor Van Holst's communication. Councillor Helmer.
I'm interested in talking about the daytime schedule part. And so I'm not sure that really the governance working group is necessarily the best place to put it. We did try that last time. There's a referral to the governance working group. The governance working group came forward with a recommendation, eventually got here to council, and it didn't go very far. And the governance working group now I think is even smaller than it was during the last term of council. I think the likelihood that the working group might come forward with something that's not supported by the whole council is also pretty high. And so I think perhaps the discussion is better had directly at a standing committee, perhaps SPPC. I'm not sure exactly where we would have the discussion. So I'm interested. A note and file doesn't prevent any of the future action. I'm interested in the issue around daytime meetings, as the councillor knows very well. I think that'd be more effective for a lot of reasons. I think if we're going to get into compensation issues, whether it's full-time or not, the compensation task force recommended that we be paid the full-time median income for an individual in the City of London. So as far as I'm concerned, that's recognizing that it's a full-time thing. I think if we're talking about compensation, sending it to governance working group is not a great idea. I think having a task force, as we have done in the past, is a better idea. And I think if that's going to happen, it should have a specific time frame that people are working on. I do think being clear about how we regard the position, whether it's full-time or not, I think if we're going to have a task force, that would be a key thing we have to tell them, because it's certainly not up to them to decide that. I think Councillor Van Holst is right to think that that's something we should do. So I support part of it. I'm not sure that this is the right path to get us there. I will support noting and filing for now.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Can this not just be brought up at the governance task force directly and then come back? Like, I'm not quite sure of the procedure going on here.
Yes,
Can I get clarification?
I'll try to outline and then I'll ask the clerk to correct me if I'm wrong. The governance task force is a working group of council. It reports in to SPPC. Is that correct? Yeah. And so certainly the governance working group could ask SPPC for permission to work on certain things, but would need the authorization through SPPC and then council to actually spend time and resources on those items. So yes, it is possible through a request from the working group up through SPPC to council and then back down, but it can also be tasked with things through municipal council by bringing something through a standing committee, and then when approved by council would be added to the governance working group's agenda. So there are a couple of ways to add items to that agenda. It can come both from the task force, but as well directly from council through a standing committee. Is that right? Awesome. Councillor Van Holst.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate the comments. So what I'll do is that sometime,
Yes.
I believe Councillor Van Holst has spoken to it, but I know that Councillor Hillier, I believe, was wanting to make a quick comment, and out of respect to members of the committee first, no disrespect to one of our members, then I would like to make a comment, then if I may please, and I apologize, Councillor Van Holst, if I might make a comment, sir.
Yes, Councillor Van Holst commented to the item. Since that point, a motion was moved to note and file, and so I think that's the first time that he would be speaking on the note and file. So if you don't mind, I would let Councillor Van Holst comment, but then we can certainly continue with the debate.
Thank you, Chair.
Go ahead, Councillor Van Holst.
thank you very much. I'll certainly accept the committee's desire not to have this discussed at the governance working group, and taking Councillor Helmer's words into mind, I may just bring a motion to SPPC where a conversation can be had. Thanks.
Mayor Holder.
That satisfies me, Chair. Thank you.
Any other discussion on noting and filing this particular communication? Seeing none, we'll open that for a vote then.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So on the next item on the agenda is another communication from Councillor Van Holst. I'm going to proceed in the same way. I'm going to let him introduce his letter. Then I would look to committee for some sort of action to deal with the letter, whether that's a motion taking an action or a motion to note and file the communication. But let's hear from Councillor Van Holst first.
Thank you very much. So this was an idea that came to me as a result of our putting people on various committees. I noticed that the commissions and boards, we had some people take on a great deal of responsibility, and others took on, ended up on no boards and commissions. And it seemed like it might be worthwhile to recognize people for the work that they are doing, often during the day, for these things. And one possibility is this: there are committees now that councillors could receive a stipend on. The Health Unit, London Hydro, the LTC, the police, there are stipends paid to directors, but not to councillors. And the reason we did that was so that people weren't fighting over the appointments that were paid versus the ones that weren't. Seems to me that we could come up with a system where we just simply ask those groups, those commissions, to provide those funds that would be paid to the committee members like myself on London Hydro, but just have it go into a fund, and then everyone who is taking on a committee would be paid for a certain amount to divide that up. maybe $200 or something like that for taking the time to read agendas and go to whatever committee and commission meetings they're on. It wouldn't have any effect on the budget because it's simply coming as a small amount from those boards and commissions themselves. So this is simply an idea to deal with that perhaps lack of equity there. I hope you like the idea. You're welcome to send this off to the clerks to look at something. I've discussed it with them. They didn't think it would be that difficult to come up with something. Thank you.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Well, I think we all remember the process of filling up the various committees and boards of commission, and I think we all remember that there was quite a bit of competition for these positions. So the idea of having to pay people from council to go and take part in these, I don't think is necessary at all. We certainly don't need it as an inducement or as any kind of reward, nor should it be. So I think I would move to note and file this.
Okay, was there a seconder to note and file this particular item? And we could certainly have discussion on it if councillors would like to as well. Mayor Holder.
I'll second to note and file.
Any other discussion on this particular item? Mayor Holder.
Noting that this is a note and file, what I'm particularly concerned about, though, is that the focus of these last two motions have been particularly involving compensation, particularly to council members. And here we are in the first 5 weeks of our term as elected officials, knowing precisely what the compensations, roles, responsibilities were. And I think it sends a brutal message to our broader community. And I'll say more of this if, as and when it comes either to council or to whichever committee it ends up. And but I just wanted to share that thought right now. Thank you.
Any other comments on this? Okay, seeing none, we'll open that for vote. It's been, moved by, sorry, we got moved by Councillor Van Meerbergen, seconded by Mayor Holder, Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. I just wonder, through the chair, if we could have a little bit of background, because I'm not sure that everybody is familiar with the history around this particular aspect of compensation. It used to be that councillors did receive stipends. Some other councils, they do have stipends for people who are attending different boards and commissions. They have different compensation philosophy where they provide a lower, generally lower general stipend, and then you get per meeting stipends in some cases. I know that's how they do it in the county, for example. And I just wonder if somebody on staff wants to comment on how things were done, because we moved away from that. We used to give an increase to the stipend to the chairs of committees, for example, also, and we stopped doing that, and we just rolled it into the general compensation during the last round of changes. So I wonder if we can just have a review of that, if anyone knows it off the top
Yes,
of their head.
I'll probably go to two individuals on this. I know Mr. Hayward could probably comment on the stipends. I know the clerk also has some information about the change we made to compensation for committee chairs as well. So Mr. Hayward first.
Yeah, through the chair, I was just trying to rack my brains as when it changed, because I think it was, I believe the 2011 to 2014 council still had the stipends paid. No, maybe it was prior to that. Okay. Anyway, I'll go back and look. I think maybe we can give you an answer on that by council. I don't have the information in front of me right now.
Thank you. Through the chair, the changes that were made to the additional compensation for members who served as chairs of various committees was removed as part of a recommendation out of the council compensation review in the last term. I would also add that in the time that I've been with the city, which is in that term that the city manager mentioned, it's been at least 10 years that there hasn't been additional compensation for those additional boards and commissions. Thank you.
And I believe if I was chairing this last year, I would have got $1,100 for the year. This year, I just get the privilege of hanging out with you for the year. Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Yeah, if I could, no, that's correct. I mean, we were compensating chairs of standing committees. I think it was $1,000 a year, and I think that ended last term, right? And then I was on since 2003, And that whole time, nobody got any stipend for going on a border commission. So if that's helpful.
Yep, lots of information. Certainly, I know people can follow up with our staff if they need a little more on the history. Sure, someone somewhere has a good, accurate record of this, likely in the clerk's department. Is there any more discussion on the noting and filing of this particular request? Okay, seeing none, I will open that for a vote.
Closing the vote, that motion carries 6-0.
The final item on our agenda is a letter from myself. If the committee would indulge me, I can just introduce it briefly and then I'll leave it in committee's hands unless there are any objections. Okay, I'll just introduce it quickly. So the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, I'm the current board member. Through the municipal elections that happened this year in a number of provinces, there were some members of the board who were not reelected. Those vacancies are being filled. One of them was for the third vice president position. It is a position tied to the province of Ontario, and so the person filling that position will be a board member from Ontario. There's currently about 8 or 9 board members from Ontario left, so I've written a letter asking for council's support to do that. It will be a requirement to run, to have the support of your municipal council. The anticipated timeline for that particular election, it will be done digitally. It should be open on February 4th. It will close February 15th. It'll be a very short timeline. Hence, I wanted to bring a letter of support early so that I had that in hand in case the committee cycles didn't quite line up. That is very reasonable and has been done in the past. So I'll leave that with committee. I have Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much. A brief comment, and I can make a motion. I'm delighted by this. I think that speaks to your commitment, Councillor Morgan, to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. So I am moving that London City Council endorse the nomination of Councillor Josh Morgan to run for the position of third vice president for the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and approve payment of all eligible costs associated with attending the FCM's Board of Directors meetings in 2019.
Seconder, Councillor Van Meerbergen. I will note that the additional costs, I'm already a board member, so we were already approved to pay those anyways. So no additional costs, actually. I have that moved and seconded. Any other discussion on this particular item? Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Good luck.
Okay, with that, we'll open the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Is there any other, thank you. Still has to get through council. Any other additional business from committee members? Seeing none, then 36 minutes into the meeting, I'd look for a motion to adjourn. Deputy Mayor Helmer, Councillor Van Meerbergen, all those in favor? That carries. Thank you for your time.